You can run from the past for as long as you want, until it finds its way back to you. A young woman returns to her childhood home after nearly a decade away, not to reclaim anything, just to clean up and prepare to sell off the past. But in the dust-covered attic, she finds an old notebook, 7 names, and a scribbled message. Choose one, forgive, only one. From that moment on, she's pulled into a strange journey. Each day, she must face one person, one memory, one question with no clear answer. Yet the thing she fears most isn't in anyone else's past. It's a memory she buried in her own. This is a series about forgotten secrets, unspoken pain, and the hardest choice of all, forgiveness. Not just for others, but for yourself. 6 days, 6 doors, and one final chance to live honestly. Claire Harper, 27 years old, fair-skinned, with long blonde hair and a face etched with quiet traces of the life she's lived, returns to the house she grew up in after nearly a decade of silence. The house sits in the northern suburbs of Oregon, surrounded by pine forests and hushed rooftops. The afternoon she arrives. The sky is overcast, and a breeze moves gently through the hallway, as if the house is still breathing through old memories. Claire didn't come back out of nostalgia. Her mother passed away 6 months ago, and the house is about to be sold. The papers are signed, and there's exactly 1 week left before the new owners move in. She steps into the living room, and everything is eerily unchanged. The faded floral curtains, the wooden wall clock frozen at 3:17, and the table lamp she once knocked over as a child while hiding tears after a fight. Claire had meant to go up to the attic, but while sorting through her mother's room, she noticed a small wooden staircase still lowered, as if someone had been up there not long ago. She climbed each step slowly, each creak echoing into the dusty, dim space above. The attic held the usual remnants of a life once lived. Old cardboard boxes, a childhood sweater, a few silvered photo frames. As she swept her flashlight around, the beam caught a patch of wood on the ceiling that looked recently disturbed, its edges just slightly out of place. Curious, Claire gently slid a utility knife along the seam. Tucked behind the panel, nearly swallowed by shadow, was a small wooden box. Inside it lay a brown leather notebook, so worn its edges curled outward, the spine threatening to give. Written in blue ink by hand and slightly faded, were the words, "Do not open unless you want to know the truth." Claire sat amid the layers of dust, opened the notebook, and found a list on the very first page. Lorna Eastman, Mr. Gavin Beckerow, Uncle Ray, Carla Marsh, Mrs. Delaney, and finally, Claire Harper, her own name. Beneath the list, written in heavier, more jagged strokes than the rest, were the words, "Choose one, forgive, only one." She read it again, and again. A chill crept down her spine, not because the names were unfamiliar, but because each one stirred something vague, something unspoken. Half-shaped memories flicker at the edge of her mind, never quite solidifying. Why forgiveness? Forgive what? And more importantly, who wrote this notebook? Each name felt like a shard of something broken, but her memory was like a fog mirror, offering shapes without clarity, reflections without feeling. She didn't know why they mattered, only that they did. Claire stood frozen for a long moment, the silence thick around her. Then, out of nowhere, a memory surfaced, a journal she kept when she was 17, the one that had suddenly vanished one day, never spoken of again. Eventually, she stopped searching for it, as if it had never existed at all. A chilling thought crept into her mind. What if she was the one who wrote this list? What if she had once chosen someone to forgive, and then buried the truth so deeply that even she no longer remembered? The curiosity that had led her here now gave way to something else entirely. Confusion, unease. The fear no longer came from the notebook itself, but from the dawning realization that she could no longer be certain who she was in this story. Claire shivered, the air suddenly heavier, as if the past had just brushed her shoulder from behind. It said nothing. It simply stood there, waiting for her to turn around. Claire sat on the cold, dusty attic floor. The leather notebook splayed open across her lap, like an old wound pulled wide again. A pale beam of light angled in through the attic's single window, falling across the loose strand of her blonde hair, casting a dim glow of the names on the page, as if memory itself were trying to hide beneath the ink. Each name was a knock from the past, and at the same time, a blank space. She forced herself to reach inward to find something, anything, but all that surfaced were broken pieces without sound, without feeling, without form. She reread the final line beneath the list. Choose one, forgive. Only one. The word struck like a sentence past. No explanation, no negotiation, no why. Her eyes moved to the first name, Lorna Eastman, the neighbor who lived next door when Claire was a child. No clear memory came. Just a vague image of an elderly woman with silver hair who handed out cookies and had a creaky chair on her porch. Claire frowned. Forgive what? Why her? Or was it not her at all? She looked at the second name, Mr. Gavin, her high school English teacher. A sudden twinge pulsed through her chest. Something heavy, once deeply felt, but she couldn't reach it. It slipped away like a dream vanishing with morning light. Claire shivered. She knew she had forgotten. Not the kind of forgetting that comes with time, but the kind you choose, the kind you need. And now, that forgetting was starting to crack. She exhaled, eyes drifting down to the third name, Becca Rowe, and for the first time, a real emotion hit. Pain, threaded with betrayal. Becca, her best friend at 17, the one who knew her better than anyone, and then one day just disappeared. No calls, no messages, as if Claire had never existed. A flicker of memory. The two of them sitting on the old roof on her birthday night, laughing loud, swearing they'd never leave each other. Claire clutched the notebook tighter. Her heart ached with a truth she hadn't dared name. What if she was the one who left? The next name, Uncle Ray. A cold jolt ran down her spine. Claire froze, not because she remembered him clearly, but because she didn't need to. She knew, with the same certainty as sunlight outside that window, that his name was tied to something wordless and terrifying. Her stomach twisted. She couldn't remember, but her body did. It remembered flinching awake in the middle of the night, double-locking the door and still not feeling safe. Footsteps no one else admitted hearing. She closed a notebook like she was shutting a door, and something waited behind it. Claire stood up. A breeze slipped in through the small window, blowing strands of hair across her face. She didn't brush them away. She closed her eyes for a beat, steadying her breath. She didn't know where she was headed, only that she was no longer standing at the threshold. She had stepped inside. Claire stepped down from the attic, the notebook clutched tightly to her chest, as if letting go would mean losing the last fragile tether between herself and the truth. The house below felt suddenly foreign, like an apartment that belonged to someone else. Everything was familiar, yet none of it seemed hers anymore. She sat down on a long couch in the living room, the one where her mother used to knit every evening, and closed her eyes, letting the notebook rest silently beside her. One thought kept drilling deeper. What if she was the one who wrote it? At first, the question was just a soft knock, but it became a hammer, pounding against the walls of her memory, echoing, painful and unanswered. She thought of herself at 17, a time swallowed by sleepless nights with no reason, a growing isolation, and the constant feeling that someone was always watching. Claire didn't remember what happened, but she remembered how it felt. Always careful, always on edge, carrying a fear no one else would admit existed. She used to keep a journal. She once tore out a page and tucked it into the pocket of her coat, and then never saw the notebook again. She used to think her mother took it, then suspected Becca, then wondered if she had burned it herself. But this notebook, it bore her own handwriting. The uneven ink, places where the pen pressed too hard, her hand trembling. It was all so familiar. It made her throat tighten. Claire began to cry. No sobs, no sound, just tears falling onto her shirt, and she didn't wipe them away. She had thought she was fine, thought time would dissolve things into nothing, or at least wear them down to something dull. But now, the pieces weren't falling into place to accuse anyone else. They were circling back to ask her, "You saw, you knew, so why didn't you do anything?" She had no answer. No one did. All she had was one unshakable truth. Past wasn't where the truth lived. It was here, now, in the way her hands trembled when she looked at herself. Claire sat motionless for a long time after coming down from the attic, as if every movement in her body was being held back by an invisible thread, pulling her quietly back into the past. The notebook lay open across her lap, the list of 7 names glowing faintly in the fading afternoon light. Her eyes rested on the last one, Claire Harper, written in a trembling, heavy script, like the final imprint of someone desperate to be remembered. The same question circled in her mind. If she was the one who wrote these names, what had driven her to remind herself that only one could be forgiven? She didn't have the answer, but she saw one thing with painful clarity. The gaps in her memory weren't an accident. They were a decision. She began searching, not through objects, but through her mind, as if the fragments she had buried long ago were beginning to surface, rising like broken glass beneath still water. She remembered the nights she couldn't sleep, the hallway light slicing through crack under her door like a blade poised above darkness. She remembered the smell, sweat and laundry detergent, and the weight of someone sitting silently on the edge of her bed. She remembered writing it down in blue ink with shaking hands, using the only words a child could find to name fear, the dark. And then she remembered something else. The journal didn't go missing. She had thrown it away, or burned it, or hidden it in a place so deep, even she hadn't dared speak of it since. Because the moment she wrote it all down, the truth had become undeniable, too sharp, too real to keep living like nothing had happened. Claire stood up, moved by something primal and undefined. She walked straight to her old bedroom, the one she kept shut tight for 2 days now. It was exactly as she'd left it. A single bed with blue-striped blankets, a leaning bookshelf, and a faint ink stain on the wall from where she'd once written something and tried to wipe it away. She pulled open the top desk drawer. Nothing. Then the second, empty. But when she opened the third, she saw it. A small piece of paper, folded in 4, its edges brown with time. Her hand trembled as she unfolded it. A familiar, shaky script. "If I disappear, don't ask anyone. Just trust Becca." Her chest tightened. The words didn't just confirm what she had buried. They confirmed something far more painful. She had known. And she had stayed silent. Claire returned to the living room after night had fully fallen. The old table lamp was the only source of light, casting a small, warm circle, holding her still in a world that no longer had clear edges. She sat down on the couch, placed a notebook on the wooden table, and looked at the list again, not as someone flipping to the files of others, but as someone reading back a set of instructions she had once written for herself. There was still resistance in her heart, but alongside it, a quiet acceptance. Each name was a moment, a person, a fragment of memory she once believed she had erased. But the truth was, it had only sunk deeper, to the layer where repressed things go, where memory survives even without permission. Claire stopped at the first name, Lorna Eastman. Mrs. Lorna, the silver-haired woman with eyes that always seemed to know more than she ever said. Claire remembered a night, the panic, the running across the lawn, how Mrs. Lorna didn't ask questions, just let her lie down, and quietly called her mother. Claire had once been angry about that, but now she wasn't. Mrs. Lorna hadn't done anything wrong. She also hadn't known what would have been right. And in the world of adults back then, maybe she was the only one brave enough to simply offer her a place to rest, if only for a single night. Claire opened the drawer, picked up a pen. Her hand didn't shake. She gently drew a single line through the name, not to erase it, not to cross it out, just a soft, slanted mark. A beginning, a way to say, here, this is where I choose to start. Claire didn't need an apology. She didn't need a reason that made sense. She needed to move forward. She placed the notebook back into the wooden box, where it had waited for nearly a decade, for the one day she'd be ready to open it. But this time, she didn't hide it. She left it on the table, in the center of the living room, like a part of her story she no longer feared. Claire leaned back into the chair and closed her eyes. The night breeze slipped through the old window frame. For the first time in a very long while, she didn't feel cold. She knew tomorrow morning she would go see Mrs. Lorna. Not to ask for anything, just to say, I remember now. Inside Mrs. Lorna's house, everything looked just as it had all those years ago. The wedding photo on the wall, the porcelain teacup with a fine crack still resting on the mantel, and the smell of baked cookies mixing with damp wood, that specific scent of memory Claire had never quite forgotten. They sat across from each other at the round table by the window, where the morning light streamed in just enough to reveal the dust particles, drifting silently between them. No one spoke at first. There was no need. Some stories begin best in silence. It was Mrs. Lorna who finally broke it. Her voice was quiet, as if afraid to shatter the air. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. At least, not like this. Claire didn't answer. She simply looked at her deeply, as if trying to let her eyes say what her mouth couldn't. I never knew exactly what happened, Lorna continued, but I always felt something very wrong once touched you. Claire closed her eyes. An image flashed, a dark hallway, an unlocked door, the soft creak of a window opening at midnight. But it still wasn't full story, just fragments, waiting for someone to call them by name. I'm sorry, Lorna said, eyes cast downward, not because of what I did, but because of what I didn't do. Claire heard the words, and some part of her wanted to say, I know, but her lips didn't move. Instead, she reached into her pocket, pulled out the notebook, and placed it on the table. She didn't hand it over. She didn't explain. She just laid it there, a quiet artifact of everything that had gone unspoken. Mrs. Lorna glanced at the page, her eyes landing on the first name, Lorna Eastman. A flicker of pain passed across her face, but she didn't ask. Claire took out a pen. She didn't cross the name out. She didn't draw a line. She marked a small corner beside it, a soft notch, incomplete, but enough to say, something has begun to move. Not full forgiveness, not erasure, just space, newly named, ready to be filled when she was. They sat for a few minutes more in silence. Then Claire stood, folded the notebook. Mrs. Lorna didn't stop her, didn't walk her to the gate. She just watched quietly as the young woman walked back toward the rising sun. She just watched quietly as the young woman walked back toward the rising sun. She placed the notebook on the table, right in the center of the living room, sat down. The morning breeze slipped through the open window, stirring the first page. 6 names remained, 6 encounters, 6 untold stories. But this time, Claire was no longer being hunted by the past. she was walking into it, step by step, by choice. Episode 1 is a doorway into Claire Harper's inner journey. Not to uncover secrets others kept from her, but to confront the truth she once hid from herself. The notebook with 7 names isn't just a list of people to forgive. It's a map, a guide back to the locked-away memories, to the quiet places where each person who crossed her life left behind a silence she never dared to touch. When Claire marks the first name, it isn't because that person deserves forgiveness. It's because she deserves to let go. Her steps aren't grand. They aren't dramatic, but they carry weight, because each one is the voice of a girl who stayed silent for too long, finally learning to name the truth in her own words. This isn't just a story. It's a return to self. If something in this story made you pause, a line, an image, or just the way Claire looked into her own memory, leave a comment. Maybe you, or someone who reads it, will feel a little less alone on their own journey. If you want to keep walking beside Claire, through every drawer she opens, every name still waiting to be spoken, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need a gentle whisper. You weren't wrong to forget, but you'll be stronger if you dare to remember. We'll meet again in the next episode. But this time, the person waiting for Claire won't just stir memory. They'll make her face a part of the past she wrote herself.